My mom says I was really shy when I was little. Nowadays, there's no trace of that, so it's a funny story, but my mom apparently worked hard to help me overcome my shyness. I remember being made to participate actively in events with other kids. At the time, it was incredibly annoying and really stressful for me. However, I am grateful to my mom. Thanks to her, I was able to meet my soulmate early in life. She's lying next to me, breathing steadily in her sleep. She is truly my soulmate. I'm Alex, 27 years old. I work as a physical therapist. I work at the biggest general hospital in town. I'm still pretty new and get scolded a lot, but I find this job fulfilling. So I am pretty proud of it. I got married earlier than any of my peers, at 23. That was 4 years ago. My colleagues were a bit shocked that I got married right after starting my job, and even my senior coworkers were surprised. But I decided long ago to get married right after getting a job. For me, it was just as planned. As I finished my lunch break and was about to get back to work, my phone lit up. It seemed I had a message. I quickly checked and saw a message from my wife, "I'll be late." A plain, simple message with no emojis. That's just like her. My wife, Emily. She works as a librarian at the state library. I first met her at that library. When I was in elementary school, I went to the library every weekend. I was there for the storytime sessions held on weekends. The children's book librarians would read picture books to us. Back then, I was very shy and my mom would take me to various events. I quickly realized that if I said I was going to the library, my mom would let me off the hook. So, when she tried to drag me somewhere, I would say I was going to the library and escape. That's when I discovered the storytime sessions. One day, while I was reading a picture book quietly at the library, an announcement came over the PA system about the start of a storytime session. Curious, I headed to the place mentioned in the announcement. There were already a few kids gathered there. Some mothers with small babies were also present. The area, located in a corner of the children's section, required us to take off our shoes and sit on the carpet. I remember feeling nervous about trying something new. As I waited with the others, the librarians who were usually at the checkout counter appeared, pushing a cart filled with books. There was a plump, smiling middle-aged woman and a tall young woman with glasses. I saw them often. But behind them walked a woman I didn't recognize. She had striking black hair cut straight across her forehead and looked a bit anxious. "All right, let's get started," the plump librarian said as she sat down in front of us. It seemed they were going to read to us. At first, I didn't expect much, but as the reading progressed, I got drawn into the story. Later, Emily told me that all librarians assigned to the children's counter were trained in storytelling and practiced regularly. They read research papers, studied child psychology on how to capture kids' attention, and they even worked on their voices and expressions. They were professionals. From picture books that even babies could understand to longer novels read over several weeks. They made sure the kids who attended regularly were never bored. My first experience at the storytime session was, to say the least, amazing. The librarian's storytelling skills were amazing and had us completely engrossed. However, there was one disappointing thing. The young librarian who walked at the back. When she started reading a picture book, for some reason, the babies would start crying. On top of that, her reading was so monotonous that it became boring. Even while cleaning up after the session, I remember she kept her head down and her shoulders slumped. Despite the senior librarians encouraging her, saying it's okay, she just sighed and smiled weakly. I thought it was interesting. I'm looking forward to next week." Before I knew it, I was talking to the dejected librarian, trying to cheer her up. She looked up, surprised, her eyes widening. In her big eyes, I saw my own desperate expression. "Thank you. I'll try harder next time." A hesitant smile. I think she was probably not very good with kids. Still, she squatted down to my level and looked me in the eye as she said that. "Thank you. I'm glad." It was the first time an adult had looked me in the eye and thanked me, and I suddenly felt so flustered I couldn't reply. While I kept silent, looking down, her slender hand gently patted my head. When she stood up, I smelled a floral scent. Now I understand it was probably her shampoo or something. But back then, I wondered why she smelled so nice. A few weeks later, that librarian was no longer at the storytime sessions. As a child, I didn't understand things like reassignments, so when I realized I wouldn't see her again, I felt a sudden wave of sadness and nearly cried. Her clumsy, monotonous storytelling was sometimes hard to listen to, but I admired her earnest effort. I'm home. Sorry I'm late. Welcome back. Was it a busy day? I checked the clock, it was just past 9 p.m. She should have been off by 5:30 p.m. if there was no overtime. I had a complicated research request. Emily, looking tired, massaged her temples as she headed to her room to put away her things. Meanwhile, I reheated dinner. We have an agreement that whoever is free does the housework. From the moment she texted about working late, I started planning dinner. Of course, when I'm busy or have overtime, Emily takes charge of the chores. Looks delicious. Thanks, as always. Emily, now in casual clothes, praised the dinner spread on the table. Let's dig in before it gets cold. Also, I have something to discuss, I said, as I was handing her soup. She tilted her head, curious. Next weekend, my department is having a party on a cruise ship. I'd like you to come with me. I work in the rehabilitation department at the largest general hospital in the area. Occasionally, we have these social gatherings. Really? Can I join? Won't it be expensive? Emily looked concerned. It's true that many doctors live extravagantly, with spending habits that are quite different from ours. Once, I almost got taken abroad on a whim. This time it's part of our employee benefits, so it's free. Emily smiled with relief at my words. She glanced at the calendar on the wall and nodded in agreement, saying okay with a satisfied look. Your birthday is coming up, so let's celebrate then. Then it's settled. I was so happy that I bounced a little on the spot. Introducing Emily to my colleagues and having a rare dinner out together was an exciting prospect. I wouldn't get in trouble for being a little giddy. Seeing my excitement, Emily smiled a bit, amused. I reunited with that dejected librarian when I was a sophomore in high school. I had continued going to the library. After entering middle school, I often studied for exams in the library's study room rather than at home. Around the time I started worrying about my future and career, I ventured into a floor I had never been to before at the library. The third floor housed medical and business-related books. It was completely different from the second floor I usually used. It was very quiet, and most of the people here were college students. There were even private study rooms available by the hour. I wandered through the shelves, looking for books about physical therapy, a field I had been interested in. But I couldn't find the books I was looking for on this new floor. As I was feeling a bit lost, I heard a quiet voice from behind me. Are you looking for something? I'm looking for books about physical therapy. As I turned around to answer, I gasped. There stood the librarian who used to look so downcast. Yes? She took a step back, probably startled by my exclamation. No, I mean, yes. I'm looking for books on physical therapy. Thinking back, I must have seemed incredibly awkward. Her hair, which had been cut short at the shoulders, was now long, and she looked more mature. Her skin was still as fair as I remembered. Books on physical therapy, right? Not the textbook, but something about an overview of the profession? I nodded silently at her precise question. She said, I see, and slipped gracefully between the shelves. I was mesmerized by her smooth movements, like a fish swimming through the sea of books. I followed her, feeling foolish. The ends of her long black hair brushed past my nose, carrying that familiar floral scent. That day, I couldn't muster the courage to talk to her much and just followed her guidance to the books. Watching her walk back to the main desk at the entrance to the third floor was all I could manage. From that day on, I started spending a lot of time on the third floor. I also learned that this floor housed reference books and dictionaries. The 10 private study rooms were particularly attractive. Though there was a 2-hour limit, they allowed us to focus on studies and research. Around December of my senior year in high school, I began exchanging a few words with her when picking up the keys to the study rooms. She seemed to be in charge of the third floor desk and was always busy. She efficiently handled difficult reference requests and interlibrary loans and photocopies. She also actively helped people to find the books that they were looking for. She was so different from the downcast librarian I remembered. I thought, this must be what it means to be in the right job. Seeing her working so energetically made me seriously consider what job would make me feel the same. "Can I have a study room, please?" I asked at the counter as usual. The woman at the counter efficiently explained the rules and prepared the key while I waited. At that moment, the door to the back room opened, and she appeared. Her name was Emily. She had been working as a librarian all this time. She was probably about 15 years older than me. That's all I knew about her. Oh, there was one more thing. Emily always had a floral scent. As I absent-mindedly watched her emerge from the back room, our eyes met unexpectedly. Though I wasn't doing anything wrong, I quickly looked away, feeling a jolt. I wanted to say something, even just a greeting. Hiding my feelings, I took the key to the study room and quickly walked away from the counter. There should be no reason for her to ignore me. I was a user and she was a staff member. She'd surely respond with a polite greeting. But I lacked the courage. I felt incredibly foolish and cowardly. Regretting not saying anything, I sighed deeply as I unlocked the study room door. About an hour later, there was a hesitant knock on the door behind me. I turned around to see Emily standing there. I was so surprised I nearly jumped out of my chair. "Excuse me. The materials you reserved just arrived, and I thought you might need them for your studies." In her hands was the reference book I had reserved a month ago. It was delayed on the previous return, and I'm sorry for the wait. I took the book silently, as if I had forgotten how to speak. My gaze remained fixed on her. I always thought her intelligent-looking forehead was her charm point. Sensing my gaze, she covered her forehead with both hands. "Is there something on my face?" It was the first time I heard her speak without her usual formal tone. She looked up at me with a puzzled expression, which was adorable. It might be rude as she was older than me, but her gesture was so cute that I couldn't help but laugh. "You don't have to laugh. You always look at my forehead. It makes me worried that my hairline is receding." She spoke quickly and a bit angrily, though her voice remained low. "No, that's a misunderstanding. It's not like that at all." "Not like that?" She repeated my words, pressing for an explanation. There was no other way but to be honest. "I mean, I think your forehead looks intelligent and beautiful." Hearing this, her cheeks turned bright red. She opened her eyes wide in surprise, her mouth opening and closing in shock. Even her fingertips, which were covering her forehead, turned red. Finally, she found her voice. "Don't tease someone older than you." She slammed the study room door shut and hurried back towards the counter. I clutched my head, squatting down on the spot, thinking, I messed up. Absolutely, she must have hated me. She probably thought I was a creepy and annoying library user. After all, a high school boy admiring an older woman's forehead could definitely seem odd. I finally had a chance to talk to her, and I blew it by saying something so weird. Feeling disappointed, I couldn't focus on studying and sighed repeatedly. I couldn't bring myself to restart my studies. I absent-mindedly flipped through the book she had brought me. A piece of paper slipped out from between the pages. It must have belonged to the previous borrower. Casually picking it up, I gasped at what I saw. "Keep up the good work with your studies. I'm still working hard on my storytelling skills too," was written in an upward slanting handwriting. It also had a small drawing of a bear and the name Emily. Emily had realized that the child from back then was me. Time really doesn't rewind, does it? I wished I could take back my awkward comments. A big sigh escaped me without realizing it. For the next few days, I avoided going to the library and used the school library after classes. I felt too embarrassed to face Emily. Gradually, I stopped going to the library altogether. Eventually, I faced my college entrance exams and went on to university. Even now, I feel embarrassed when I recall my cowardly teenage self. "Hey, why do you always cover your forehead?" In the taxi heading to the boat party that weekend, I asked Emily, who was sitting next to me. Recently, she had cut her bangs neatly above her eyebrows, like when we first met. "Because you keep staring at it," she replied coldly, still looking ahead. "But it's such a beautiful forehead," I said, pouting playfully. Emily glanced at me with a slightly exasperated look. Really, you haven't changed a bit. Though her words seemed annoyed, I could sense the affection behind them. I reached out and brushed her bangs aside to see her beloved forehead. Even the few gray hair at her hairline were precious to me. Back then, I couldn't have imagined growing old together. I had gotten into a local university and was enjoying college life. I still loved books and spent a lot of time in the university library, but I had stayed away from the state library where Emily worked. In my sophomore year, I used the interlibrary loan service to borrow materials from the state library that weren't available at the university library. I knew I could have gone to get them myself, but I couldn't muster the courage to face Emily. I picked up the interlibrary loan materials at the university library counter. In the study room, I took the materials out of the special interlibrary loan bag. The bag had a transparent pocket on the front with details about the loan. It listed information like any damage to the materials or markings in them. As I read the handwriting, I was startled. The familiar upward slanting handwriting caught my eye. I quickly pulled out my wallet and searched for the note I had kept since that day. It was tucked away behind a card. I compared the handwriting on the note with that on the interlibrary loan documents. It's Emily's handwriting. For a moment, it felt like time had rewound. I had thought she was out of reach, but at that moment, it felt like she was standing right beside me. The floral scent I had tried to forget came rushing back. All the feelings I had tried to suppress came back with that scent, making me restless. Before I knew it, I was running. I wanted to see her again. I pedaled my bike furiously towards the state library, a place I hadn't visited in years. I ran up the escalator 2 steps at a time inside the library. A nearby staff member warned me, "Please, no running," but I couldn't care less. By the time I reached the 3rd floor, I was out of breath, and my forehead was slightly sweaty. I glanced over at the checkout counter and saw Emily at the computer on the far end. Her long bangs seemed to be in the way, and she kept brushing them back as she worked on some documents. She was probably working on interlibrary loan documents. She didn't seem to notice me. After taking a few deep breaths, I approached her. Seeing her for the first time in years, she looked smaller than I remembered. I walked cautiously. She was so focused on her work that she didn't notice me. I stepped in front of her, and my shadow fell across the documents she was working on. Realizing someone was there, she looked up from her papers. While still working on the computer, she asked, "Do you need to check something out?" I've been studying hard," I said. Emily looked up at me suspiciously. "It's been a while. Sorry for not coming sooner." I realized how much growing up changes things. I didn't hesitate to talk to her. I guess I had become bold enough with age. Seeing my face, Emily's mouth fell open in surprise. I've been wanting to thank you for a long time." I was desperately trying to keep the conversation going. Suddenly, Emily snapped back to reality and quickly covered her forehead with both hands. Her gesture left me momentarily speechless. "Shall we start with renewing your library card?" she said, still covering her forehead and speaking in a businesslike tone. The contrast was too funny, and I couldn't help but laugh. "Wait, no, that's not fair," I said, trying to stifle my laughter. "Even after all this time, you're still rude," she said, blushing all the way to her neck. I watched in wonder as her pale skin turned red. Seeing her glaring up at me with her face all red, a warm feeling rose up in my chest. I decided to voice that feeling. I resolved to move past my cowardice. "Please renew my library card, and after closing, I'd like to check you out, Emily," I said, handing her my card. Her already red face turned even redder. Even her fingertips were red as she took my card. Trying to type on the computer with one hand while still covering her forehead, she kept making error sounds that echoed through the quiet floor. Given up, she finally used both hands to operate the keyboard. She then pouted and muttered just loud enough for me to hear, "You've become quite cheeky." When she handed back my renewed library card, there was a small sticky note with a phone number on it. "The library closes at 8 p.m. on weekdays," she said formally, then covered her forehead again and signaled with her eyes for me to leave. I felt like laughing again but managed to hold it in. The lavish boat party was filled with well-dressed people of all ages. There was a dress code, so everyone was dressed appropriately. My colleagues looked different from how they do during the day, and it was hard to recognize anyone at first. Many staff members from other hospitals in the same network were also present, so there were many unfamiliar faces. Big hospital parties are really something. It's almost overwhelming, Emily said, wide-eyed and overwhelmed as we settled at our designated table. Yeah, it's also a place for people to show off, I replied, making Emily smile slightly and mutter, cheeky. Her muttering brought back memories and made me feel a bit ticklish inside. Hey, about the old days, I started to say to Emily, but someone tapped me on the shoulder from behind, startling me. Hey, are you Alex? Do you remember me? The overly tanned man who spoke to me seemed familiar. Is that you, Mike? Long time no see. Since high school graduation, right? The man speaking familiarly was my high school classmate, Mike. We had spent 3 years in the same class but didn't have much interaction. He belonged to the flashy group back then. I had heard rumors that he started a successful medical venture. So, you're in the medical field now? Not a doctor, maybe a radiologist? Mike seemed curious about my position and probed. I'm a physical therapist, I answered quickly, not wanting to be probed further. Mike gave a triumphant smirk. If I had said doctor, he probably would have reacted differently. I remembered how he always used to belittle others in high school. Alex, who's this? Emily, who had been standing beside me, finally spoke up. Mike, noticing Emily for the first time, looked her up and down silently. Oh, this is my high school classmate, Mike. He's a CEO of a venture company now. I introduced Mike to Emily. Mike continued to scrutinize Emily with an appraising look. Nice to meet you. I'm Alex's wife, Emily said politely, despite Mike's rude behavior. As she lightly bowed her head, a floral scent filled the air. What? Your wife? I thought she was your older sister, Mike said loudly. His tone was clearly mocking Emily and me. I felt a surge of anger and was about to step forward, but Emily, still silent, stopped me. So, you weren't interested in the girls in our class because you liked older women even back then, huh? Mike flared his nostrils triumphantly and taunted me with his words. His voice was unnecessarily loud. It felt like he was broadcasting it to everyone nearby. So, you're living off your wife, huh? He added. At this point, I couldn't stay silent anymore. But before I could confront him, Emily stepped forward. She looked Mike up and down, just as he had done to her. Mike seemed irritated by her scrutiny. After a thorough look, Emily turned to me. He doesn't look like a CEO. You are much more handsome and wonderful. Maybe character really does show in one's appearance, she said. Unlike her usual soft-spoken tone, Emily spoke loudly. What do you mean by that? How rude, Mike said. Mike's voice, now laced with anger, echoed. He glared at her with a look that would intimidate most women. However, Emily, used to handling complaints at the library, was completely unfazed. You're the one being rude. My husband made a great choice in life and is living happily. Your attempts to demean others in public only show on your face. Maybe you should look in the mirror, she said, her voice strong and steady. Mike's anger began to wane as Emily's confident demeanor and words took effect. The people around us began to give Mike disapproving looks. I could see worry starting to appear on Mike's face. And no wonder. He ran a medical venture. In a gathering full of medical professionals, having bad rumors spread about him would be disastrous. But it was already too late. I saw the wife of Dr. Anderson, director of the hospital I was working at, frowning and whispering while giving Mike a reproachful look. She was also 12 years older than Dr. Anderson, a similar situation to mine and Emily's. The insults directed at us probably felt personal to them as well. Evidently, I noticed a blue bulging vein on Dr. Anderson's temple as he sat next to his wife. You old hag. Isn't it shameless to marry a younger man? Mike shouted, sealing his fate. Dr. Anderson signaled for security, who quickly approached. Mike, looks like your ride's here, I said as security arrived and escorted him out. Then, before we knew it, Mike was being escorted to the exit. Once he was completely out of sight, Dr. Anderson's wife started clapping. The rest of the room joined in, applauding in unison. The room filled with applause. Feeling embarrassed, I looked to Emily for help. "We apologize for the disturbance," Emily said, bowing her head and looking at me. I quickly bowed my head as well. I don't remember much of what happened next because I was too nervous. We were invited by Dr. Anderson's wife to join their family for dinner. For me, dining with the head of a large hospital was surreal, and I couldn't even taste the food. The one thing I remember clearly is Dr. Anderson, in high spirits, extolling the virtues of having an older wife. Emily, meanwhile, shyly recounted our story to his wife, who had asked. Her profile looked so proud, and it made me happy. I'll make sure she never regrets choosing me. Watching Emily's profile, I made that vow in my heart. Suddenly, she noticed my gaze and turned to look at me. Realizing I was staring, she instinctively covered her forehead with both hands, brushing aside her bangs. That gesture was so amusing and endearing. Older? That doesn't matter. Meeting someone so precious is a miracle. I am proud of my younger self for not missing the chance,